Welcome to the teaching learning session of Sociology. In the lecture series of Sociology, in our last lecture, we discussed about dialectic materialism given by the Karl Marx. In today's lecture, we'll discuss about class conflict theory of Karl Marx. Before starting the class conflict theory, a quick recap of previous class. Dialectical materialism is what? Karl Marx has borrowed the concept of dialectics from Hegel. According to Hegel, society changes because of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, and ideas are responsible for these thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. As the idea changes, thesis changes to antithesis, antithesis to synthesis, and this is a cyclic process. Karl Marx borrowed this concept from Hegel. According to Karl Marx, there is a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, but he made changes in the theory given by the Hegel. According to Karl Marx, it is not the ideas which are responsible for thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, but it is class which is responsible for thesis, antithesis, and synthesis phase, right? Because of the change in the classes, because of the conflict in the classes, a new society changes and a new society comes up, right? Class conflict theory, as we all know that Karl Marx is economic determinist. According to Karl Marx, everything depends on economics or material. For Karl Marx, history is story of human labor and struggle. It is not a struggle of abstract ideas as said by Hegel. It is story of human struggle against and in hostile, right? So according to Marx, story of human labor and struggle is not a story of abstract idea, but it is a story of human struggle against and in a hostile, right? Every human being struggle for survival. They struggle against nature for their survival. They struggle against one another for their survival. One class struggle against another for their survival. So, survival, everyone struggle against nature, struggle against one another, struggle against class, right? So, materialism is, as we all know, that Karl Marx studied the previous traced back the previous societies, whether it's a slave society, feudal society, and he studied capitalistic society because he lived in capitalistic society. According to Marx, the history of all hitherto existing society is history of class struggle. The history is the story of class struggle, our opposing material interest and resources. As per Karl Marx, existing society, the history of existing society is history of class struggle. The existing society exists because of the class struggle, right? That's what he told in dialectical theory, that thesis, antithesis, and synthesis is because of class struggle. So the history of the existing society is because of the class struggle. And why this classes struggle against each other? Because of their opposing material interest and resources. Their material interest and resources are different from each other. Their interests are opposite to each other. He studied the slave society, and according to Marx, there were two antagonistic classes, master and slave. And master and slave struggled. There was a conflict between master and slaves, right? Because of their different material interest and resources. And then, because of this class struggle in the slave society, a new society comes up, that is feudal society. Feudal society is the result of the class struggle of slave society. In feudal society, again, there were two antagonistic classes, lord and serfs, right? Again, there was, over a period of time, there was struggle, class struggle between the lord and serf because of their opposing material interest, right? Because of the class struggle between lord and serf, the capitalistic society emerges, right? Capitalistic society is result of the class conflict of lord and serf of feudal society, right? Now in capitalistic society, there are two classes, capitalist and worker. Even in this society, their capital interest or their material interest are different. Their material interest of capitalist are different from their worker interest, right? And Marx interpreted every society on the basis of material or economy. According to Marx, matter or economy is responsible for the changes in the society, and this economy is responsible for origin of class. The classes originated because of economy or because of matter. Before men do anything else, they must first produce the means of their subsistence. Everything else follows from the necessity to produce material means of our subsistence. Before we do anything else, we need few things for our survival. We need means to we need to produce the means of our subsistence, right? The basic human activity, according to Marx, is material production, right? Material production is important for the survival of classes, right? For the survival of human being. And what are the basic material production? What we need for the survival are basic needs, that is the food, clothes and shelter. So we must produce food, cloth and shelter. This is basic human activity, and these are required for this survival. And these material production are responsible for origin of classes, right? Food, clothes and shelter, means of production is responsible for origin of classes. Origin, as we know that material production is responsible for the origin of classes. Material production, there are two factors responsible for material production, that is material forces of production, or we call it means of production. Means of production or material forces of production is same thing. And the second is social relation of production. Material forces of production or means of production means what helps in production, what all do we need to produce. We need raw material, we need machines, we need tools, factories, equipments to produce all these things. These factories, tools, resources, raw material, machineries, equipments, factories, lands, all these are means of production or material forces of production. And second factor is important for the material production is social relation of production, how one is related to the means of production or forces of production. How one is related, how we are related to the material forces of production or means of production. There are two ways in which human beings are related to the means of production. First is one class, there are few who own it, means who own the means of production, who owns raw material, machines, tools, factories, equipments, lands. Those who own it is known as dominant class. And another group who don't own the means of production, means they don't have raw material, machines, tools, factories, lands, equipments, they don't own anything. This group is known as subservient class or dominated class. And this is responsible for origin of classes, right? Origin of classes, those who own the material of production, right, makes a one class, and that class is known as dominant class. And those who don't own the means of production, that class is known as subservient class or the dominated class, right? So material production is responsible for the origin of classes, right? One who own the material production or material forces of production, and the one who don't own the material forces of production. Those who don't own the material forces of production are known as subservient class or have nots. We call them have nots. And those who own it are the dominant class or haves. So I hope it's you understood what's how the origin, what are the sources of origin of classes and how classes originated, right? Now in every society, whether it's a slave society, a feudalistic society, or a capitalistic society, there were two classes, dominant class and dominated class. Like in slave society, the dominant class was the master class and the dominated class was the slave class, right? Master and slave were there. The masters were dominant class and the slaves dominated class or subservient class. In feudalistic society, feudal lords were dominant and serfs were dominated or subservient class. In capitalistic society, right, capitalists are dominant class and workers dominated class or subservient class. Dominant class is that class which owns the means of production, and we call them haves because they have the means of production. That's why we call them haves. And dominated class which don't own the means of production, and they that's why we call them have nots because they don't have the means of production. So dominant class and dominated class, according to Marx, in every society, whether it's a slave society, feudal society, capitalistic society, there were two antagonistic classes, right? And their material needs are opposite to each other. Dominant class are always less in number and dominated class are always more in number. Then it is surprising when dominant class is less in number and dominated class is more in number, then how can a dominant class rule the dominated class? This is really surprising how it is possible that though that class which is less in number, how can that class rule the class which is more in number, dominated class, right? Karl Marx explained this. According to Karl Marx, there are two methods of domination. Although dominant class is less in number, still they dominate the dominated class have nots. The haves dominate the have nots because of the two methods of domination. The first method is by controlling means of violence means through army, police, court. The dominant class tries to control the dominated class, right? By using the means of violence, army, police, and court. But according to Marx, this is a short-term method of control, right? You cannot control anyone for a longer duration by means of violence. You can control anyone by threatening them or through police, court, or army, but for longer duration, it is not possible. Then the second method, right? The second method which is responsible for the control for the longer duration of control is by controlling the thoughts, beliefs, and ideas of working class. This is the method by which the dominant class, which is smaller in number, controls the dominated class, which is larger in number. Dominant class, that is haves, control the thoughts, beliefs, and ideas of working class, that is the dominated class or have-nots, right? How they control the thoughts, beliefs, and ideas of working class? How can one control the thoughts, beliefs, and ideas of anyone? According to Marx, they control the consciousness of the working class. How they control the consciousness of the working class? They control the consciousness of the working class by creating an ideological superstructure over the material economic base. Getting the point? There are two ways of domination. The first is means of violence, which is a short term method of domination. The second one is by controlling the consciousness of the working class. By controlling the consciousness means what? Controlling the consciousness means controlling the thoughts, beliefs, and ideas of working class. Dominant class controls the thoughts, the beliefs, and the ideas of working class. How they control the consciousness of working class? By building an ideological superstructure. On what? By building an ideological superstructure over the material and economic base. And as I told you in the last lecture, according to Marx, economy is the base of the society. Economy is one which is responsible for the change in the society, right? Dialectical materialism, right? So over that economic base or the material base of the society, the dominant class forms an ideological structure, and through that ideological structure they control the consciousness of labor class. That is, they control the thoughts, beliefs, and ideas of labor class, right? Economics is the base of the society. So society is based on the economics. And culture is a part of this society. What is culture? If you remember, we discussed about the culture. Any man-made thing is culture. According to Hobbes, what is culture? Any man-made thing is culture. So society makes the culture. Culture depends on the society, and society depends on the economics. The base of the society is economics. That is, what is economics? The material forces of production and social relation of production. This is the base of the structure. Why the dominant class tried to, or why the dominant class control the dominated class? Why the why haves control have nots? Because they don't want any changes in the society or the base of the society. They want to maintain the status quo, so that capitalist should be capitalist and working class should be a working class. They don't want any change in the society. They want to maintain the status quo in the society. To maintain the status quo in the society on the base of society, that is on the economics base of the society, is material forces of production and social relation of production. On this they forms an ideological structure. What is ideological structure? Ideological structure is a combination of idea, culture, belief, morality, law, religion or morality or law or belief or culture and idea. This superstructure is formed by the capitalist just to control the consciousness of the working class, according to Marx, right? How it control? What is the function of ideological superstructure? The function of this ideological superstructure, that is ideas, culture, belief, law, religion, morals, the function of these are to justify and legitimize the division of labor. The division of labor is correct. The function is to legitimize that the working class is working class. That is correct. And a capitalist, if there is a division of labor, you are doing something and someone else is doing something, there is division of labor. That is perfectly all right. This is required to legitimize the class difference, to legitimize the vast inequality of wealth. That's why we think, na, because of our destiny, because of our kismet, we are like this, right? That is because of this ideological superstructure, to legitimize the status and power that exists in this society. This is the main function of ideological structure, right? And because of this, working class suffers from the false consciousness. They suffers from the false consciousness, and because they suffer from the false consciousness, they remain a class in itself. Now, According to Marx, because they are class in itself, this is reason, because this is the reason for their pathetic condition. It is required that instead of class in itself, they should be class for itself. They are why they are class in itself? Their working class is class in itself because of their false consciousness. They are not aware that this ideological superstructure is controlling their consciousness. They are not aware about their potential. They are not aware that this dominating class or this haves are exploiting them. Right? This is false consciousness, that they are not aware about their potentials, that they are not aware that this ideological structure is formed by the capitalist to control their consciousness. That is why they are class in itself. The day, according to Marx, the day when the working class will realize their potential, they will revolt against the capitalist, and this will result in a new society. This will result in a class conflict, and this class conflict will result into a new society. And according to Marx, the new society will be communism. He named that society as communist society or communism, right? And that day, the class in itself will convert into class for itself. Then working class will be class for itself rather than class in itself. But till date, they this working class or the subservient class are not aware about their potentials. The day they will aware about their potential, they will come out of their false consciousness, they will revolt against the capitalist, and then there will be a class conflict. This is the theory of class conflict, and this class conflict in will result in a new society, and that new society, Marx called that new society as communism. And at that time, this class in itself will become class for itself. Right? So this was the theory of the class conflict theory of Marx. According to Marx, philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Next is Marx's concept of alienation. Alienation, the literal meaning of alienation is separation from. Marx has conceived of the alienation as phenomenon related to structure of those societies in which producer is divorced from the means of production and in which a dead labor dominates the living labor. Alienation means separation. Separations from your creations, right? According to Marx, alienation is a phenomenon in which the producers are divorced or separated from their means of production. They separated this, the worker class is separated from their creativity, from their product. The Marx sense alienation in an action through which a person, group, an institution or society becomes alien because to a result of product of its own activity. When they become alien to the result or the product of its own activity. Suppose, let's take an example of a bottle manufacturing company, right? A person who is working in a bottle manufacturing company is manufacturing the bottle, but he alienates from the project. He alienates from its own activity. According to that worker, it is not his product. Why? Because the capitalist has purchased his time. He is being paid for that production. So that is why they become alien from their own activities. They alien from their products because to the nature in which it lives, to other human beings, and in addition and through any or all of to itself to own historical created human possibilities. This is because they become alienated from their own product. Alienation is always self alienation, that is one's alienation from oneself through one's own activity. When we detach ourselves from our creativity, when we detach ourselves from our production, that is alienation. Alienation is self alienation. The de-alienation of society is therefore impossible without the abolition of alienation of different human activities from each other. So DF2 for de-alienation, the abolition of alienation of different human activity is required, right? So this was the alienation concept of Karl Marx. Today we discussed about the class conflict and the alienation concept, and now we will start with a new sociologist, Emile Durkheim. Emile Durkheim, one of the important sociologists. Emile Durkheim was born on 15th of April 1858 and died on 15th of November 1917. Emile Durkheim was a French sociologist. Auguste Comte and Emile Durkheim are known for their contribution in providing credibility to sociology and establishing it as an independent academic discipline. Auguste Comte, we discussed about Auguste Comte when we were discussing BSOC 131. Auguste Comte is known as father of sociology. Auguste Comte is father of sociology, but it was Emile Durkheim who was responsible for establishing the sociology as an independent academic discipline. This is because of the efforts of Emile Durkheim. Today we are teaching and learning sociology as an academic discipline. According to Durkheim, it was possible to develop a scientific study of society. Biographical sketch of Emile Durkheim. Let us discuss the biographical sketch of Emile Durkheim before discussing the works of Emile Durkheim. Emile Durkheim was born on 15th of April 1858 in a small town in eastern France called Epinal. He grew up in a Jewish family and his father was a rabbi. Rabbi means he was a spiritual leader. His father was a spiritual leader and a religious teacher of Jewish community, right? And Emile Durkheim initially started studying this spirituality, but then he lost his interest in spirituality. And he joined a formal school. He left that religious school and joined a formal school. He grew up in a family with high focus on morality and discipline because his father was a spiritual leader. So it is understandable that he grew up in a family with a high focus of morality and discipline. In his life, he gave up Judaism and Christianity. Why he gave up Judaism and Christianity? Because he was of the opinion that these religions cannot provide answer to the problems of modern world. According to him, religion cannot provide the answer to the modern world. But you will be surprised to know about his work on religion, right? According to him, religion cannot provide the answer to the problems of the religion world, but his work is tremendous or an incredible work on religion. He retained an interest in intellectual investigation of religion, see, and morality throughout his academic career. For higher education, Durkheim joined École Normale Supérieure of most distinguished college in France in 1879. He was initially interested in psychology and philosophy, but in the third year, he decided to study sociology, which, according to him, was more rational, scientific, and practical in understanding philosophical question. So, according to Durkheim, sociology is more rational, scientific, and practical. Through sociology, one can get the answers of the philosophical questions. Durkheim was influenced by neo-Kantian scholars like Renoir and Bottrock's. Bottrock's thinking influenced Durkheim. Bottrock's held that subject matter of each discipline should be distinct. Durkheim was also influenced by Renoir's commitment to rationalism, scientific study of morality, and secular education. You will see the effect or influence of both of these in the work of Emile Durkheim. Durkheim was influenced by Renoir because of the rationalism, scientific study of morality, and secular education. He was also influenced by historian Faisal de Collins. Faisal de Collins advocated the scientific method and laid stress on importance of religious in social life. When we'll discuss about the work of Emile Durkheim, you will see the impact of these three in his work. From 1882 to 1887, Durkheim taught philosophy in state-run secondary school near Paris. By this time, while he was working in the secondary school, he decided on the topic for his doctoral thesis. He decided that he will work on the relation between individualism and socialism. Right? He started thinking about his thesis, his PhD thesis, doctoral thesis, and he decided that he will work on relation between individualism and socialism. And according to Durkheim, society is more important than individual. We'll discuss this concept. He later focused on the relation between individual and society. What is the relation between the individual and society? And in Paris, while you are appearing for doctoral thesis, you are required to write two theses, one a smaller one, and another one is a bigger one. And in smaller one, he was influenced by Montesquieu, and he wrote about Montesquieu. Montesquieu was a French political scientist, right? Montesquieu tried to explain the different types of state through other facts. He was a premier political thinker who wanted to introduce scientific comparative approach to study of socio-political institution. Durkheim considered him one of the forerunner of sociology, right? Because he introduced the scientific comparative approach of the study, and in my previous slides I told you that it was the Durkheim who thought that it is possible to study society scientifically, right? So Durkheim considered Montesquieu a forerunner of sociology, right? That's why in his smaller thesis he writes about Montesquieu. In smaller essay he writes about Montesquieu. He thought that Montesquieu is the forerunner of the sociology. And then finally he finalized his topic to the relation between individual personality and social solidarity, right? He had completed his first draft of his dissertation in 1886, and the idea subsumed in it were incorporated in his first book, The Division of Labor in Society. This is the one of the most important work of Emile Durkheim, The Division of Labor in Society, and this is This work as the uh, um, subsum. This is the subsum of his dissertation, the division of labor in society. He described about the division of labor in the society and the role of division in the labor in the society, and why is it required? Is it good or not? Whether society there should be a division of labor in the society or not? Right? It was a period of enlightenment and industrial development in Europe, and this industrial development impacting has impact on England, Germany, and even on France. France was impacted because of this industrial development and it was a period of enlightenment. What is enlightenment? We discussed about enlightenment in our previous lecture. What is enlightenment? Enlightenment is when people started thinking about logically, right? They denied to accept everything what the church said, right? They started thinking logically, rationally, right? At that time in England, Adam Smith, an economist, had written a century earlier a path-breaking book, The Wealth of Nation, and this book provided a theory for division of labor. His work was based on the wealth of nation. This wealth of nation provided a theory for the division of labor. It helped in increasing production efficiency and wealth. The revolutionary idea, the division of labor, was given a sociological meaning by the Durkheim. He wrote about the function, causes, and abnormal forms of division of labors, not in economics but in social field, in society itself, right? He discussed about the division of labor in social field rather than on the basis of economic. He wrote about the functions and abnormal forms of division of labor. They will discuss about the forms of division of labors when we'll discuss about the division of labor concept of Durkheim. Durkheim explained the method of study of society, and he explained these method in his book, The Rules of Sociological Method. Remember the books written by the Durkheim. The first is The Division of Labor, and the second book is The Rule of Sociological Method. In the book Rules of Sociological Method, he explained the methods to study the society. In this book, he defined the nature of social facts. He laid down the rules for their observation, a recognition of normal and pathological, or for explanation of sociological facts, right? He defined in this book, he defined about sociological fact. What is sociological fact? He laid down the rules for the observation of sociological fact. How can you observe the sociological fact, and how can you recognize the normal and the pathological sociological facts, and what is normal and um, pathological social facts, right? Then Durkheim wrote a work on suicide. He wanted to show its social aspects and try to explain the social condition under which suicide rate goes up. He worked on suicide. According to Durkheim, social conditions are responsible for suicide. He identified the types of suicide and said that each type had a different causes. The different social conditions are responsible for different types of suicide. In 1887, Durkheim began his career as a professor in University of Bordeaux. He published his first book, The Division of Labor in Society, in 1893 while he was working as a professor in Bordeaux University. And other books that he published in verdicts were the Rules of Sociological Methods in 1895 and Suicide in 1897. Remember the three important work of the books published by Emile Durkheim, The Division of Labor in 1893, The Rules of Sociological Method 1895, and Suicide in 1897. In Division of Labor, he discussed about the division of labor in context to society, not with context to economy. In Rules of Sociology, he described about social fact, how one can observe the social fact. He described about the normal and the abnormal social fact, and how can you distinguish between normal and abnormal social fact. And in Suicide book, he described about the types of suicides, and according to him, there are the social conditions are responsible for suicide, and the different social conditions are responsible for different types of suicide. In 1898, Emile Durkheim founded one of the first sociology journal in world called Sociological. Social context for emergence of sociology in Europe. How sociology emerged in Europe? What is the social context? Let's understand that. The emergence of sociology as a scientific discipline can be traced to the period of European history, which saw tremendous social, political, and economical changes in French Revolution and Industrial Revolution. French Revolution, because of the French Revolution and Industrial Revolution, there were the social, political, and economical changes in the Europe, right? And this period of change in Europe is known as the Enlightenment period. As I discussed, what is the Enlightenment period? It was the period of Renaissance when people started thinking about logically. It was the period of Industrial Revolution, right? Industrial Revolution, the capitalist society emerged up, and there are the two classes, that is the capitalist class and the worker class. And capitalist society emerged from the feudalistic society, and because of the feudalistic society, because of the diminishes of the feudalistic society, there was a hue and cry in the society, right? So it was a period of change. It was a period of turmoil in Europe. And the root of the ideas, such as belief that both nature and society can be studied scientifically, that human beings are essentially rational, and that the society built on the rational principle will make human realize their infinite potential, can be traced in the development of science and commerce in Europe. The new outlook developed result of commercial revolution and the scientific revolution, and crystallized during the French and Industrial Revolution, gave birth to the sociology as a discipline, as it was the period of Renaissance, right? It was a period of social revolution, industrial revolution, commercial revolution. Because of the French Revolution and scientific revolution, there was a turmoil in the society, right? And because of the changes in the society, because of the turmoil and hue and cry in the society, this gave birth to the sociology as a discipline, because the sociologists, because the intellectual wanted to study about the reasons for the changes in the society, and they want the stability in the society. They want that the stable society should be stable. So this has given rise to the sociology. There was increase in assertion of individual political right and decrease in collective authority of state, right? Individualism is on the peak, and there was a decrease in authority of state. In 1871, The France was facing political crisis and there was a decline in national unity. France worked towards the political consolidation by focusing on social progress. After French Revolution, there were many other revolutions, right? That make the French society unstable, right? There was, because of the instability of the society, there was a decline in national unity. Durkheim believed that sociological method could provide a solution to decay in moral order. Intellectual influences on Durkheim's work: social realism. Durkheim provided social explanations for all phenomena. According to Durkheim, there is a social explanation for each and every social phenomenon, for every phenomenon, and he provided the social explanation for every phenomenon. Durkheim was a social realist and he visualized society as sui generis and having existence prior to individual. Sui generis means generate by itself, right? Like amoeba, right? He visualized society as sui generis and society existed prior to individual. So according to Emile Durkheim, society is important than individual, right? As per the utilitarian social theory advocated by John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham, individuals were autonomous and were not restrained by larger social rules, but Durkheim rejected this. According to the utilitarian social theory, which was given by the Bentham and Stuart Mill, that this, according to this theory, that individuals were autonomous and society social rules cannot restrain the autonomy of individual. But according to Durkheim, it is not like this. Durkheim held that society preceded the individual. Society is important than individual. According to utilitarian theory, individual is important than the society, but according to Durkheim, society is more important than the individual. As the society, according to Durkheim, society existed prior to the individual, so society is more important than the individual. Society and individual are inseparable, right? And there exist a social constraints on individual. According to Durkheim, the social constraint always exists on the individual. That's why we call log kya kahenge. That is the social constraint. Society and individuals are inseparable. Individual cannot live without society, and society is what? So society is made up of individual group of people, so they are inseparable, and societal constraint always exists on the individual. Their action is not always utilitarian. Whatever an individual does is not because of the utilitarian requirements. He believed that human action is not based on the common motives or driven towards self interest, but there is an external constraint that exists which leads us to engage in certain action. That's why we call do's and don'ts. This is acceptable in the society and this is not. That is what Durkheim explained. According to Durkheim, human action is not based on the self-interest, not only on the self-interest, but they are driven by the external constraints and exist, which leads an individual to engage in certain action. This is the external constraint which forces us to do certain things or to take certain actions. That is why we do. This is good. this is acceptable in the society, we should do this. This is not, we should not do this. This is why, this is the external constraint which influences the actions of an individual. This led Durkheim to write the rules of sociological method. He explained all these concepts in his book, The Rules of Sociological Method. J.J. Ross had influenced on Durkheim's thought on morality and society. Morality and society was influenced by Ross. Durkheim was influenced by Ross' belief that there is a need for common social and moral rules that keep the society together, as that was an era of turmoil. So every sociologist, every intellectual wants that there should be a stability in the society. That's why Durkheim always thought about the society rather than the individual. That's why the morality, he talked about the morality and about the society, about the common social rules, right? So Durkheim believe that there is a need for common social and moral rules to keep the society together, to stabilize this society, to stabilize this society. But Durkheim didn't agree with Ross' individualistic theory. Ross held that collective will draw from many individual wills, and therefore society in that sense emerges from individuals' will. Right? But on the other hand, Durkheim analyzed morality in relation to society. Rather than individual, Ross analyzed morality in relation to individual will, but Durkheim analyzed morality in relation to society. Hobbes, who held that individuals contract out of nature and paid emphasis on individual. Durkheim held that constraint emerges from collective and not to the individual. So, according to, from this we can make out, according to Durkheim, collective constraints or society is more important than the individual. So Durkheim is one of the sociologists who has given priority to this society rather than individualism. According to Durkheim, society is more important. Individual exists because of the society. According to Herbert Spencer, it is individual who was engaged in self-interested and acts who work towards maintaining the social whole. It is this self, according to Herbert Spencer, it is the self-interest of the individual who is responsible for maintaining the social whole. But Durkheim held that social integration is not the result of the individual action, but a sense of solidarity that keeps the society together. Whether it's Hobbes, whether it's Ross, whether it's Spencer, everyone said it is because of individual society exists. They have given more stress on the individuality rather than the society. But Durkheim was of the opposite idea, of opposite thinking to Hobbes, Ross, Spencer. According to Durkheim, it is solidarity, it is constraint, collective constraint, it is society which is more important than the individual or individual actions. Right? That is how Durkheim is different from these sociologists or philosophers. In his book, The Rule of Sociological Method, Durkheim developed a methodological framework to study society. He defined how can you study society. According to Durkheim, it is possible to study society scientifically And how can you study society scientifically? He developed a methodological framework to study the society, and he described that methodological framework, in his book The Rule of Sociological Method. He held that sociology is a study of social facts. As a society rates, religious affiliation, morals, etc. According to him, study of social fact is sociology. What is social facts then? The social facts exercise a constraint upon individuals. The ultimate social reality in group and not an individual. What is a social fact? Social fact, according to Durkheim, uh, social fact is anything. At social fact exercises a constraint upon an individual. The ultimate social reality is group and not the individual, and the social facts are external and cannot be reduced to the individual facts. Right? So, society is more important than the individual. Social facts are the constraints upon the individuals, the ultimate social reality of the group, and the social facts are external and cannot be reduced to the individual facts. Scientist, Scientism and influence of positivism. The term sociology was founded by Auguste Comte in 1882, and Auguste Comte is known as the father of sociology. But in 1887, Durkheim instituted this study of sociology as an academic discipline, right? Sociology could be established as a scientific discipline only when the causal relations underlying the social activities could be studied, right? Causal relationship means karan karan ka siddhant. You can establish a sociology as a scientific discipline when you can explain the relationship, the causal relationship of the social activities. When you can study the relationship, the reason, the causes of the social activities. What is the reason behind the social activities? When you can give the reason, when you can study the causal relationship, then you can establish sociology as a scientific discipline. What is scientific discipline? Science explains the reason, right? Durkheim was influenced by Montesquieu, as I explained you earlier. Montesquieu idea that science of society was concerned with explanation of facts rather than mere speculations. Rather than speculating the society, it is important to uh, explain the facts, right? Explore the facts, give the reasons. You can study the society scientifically when you can develop a relation between the social activities. That's all for today. We'll continue with scientism and influence on positivism in our next lecture, and we'll discuss the other works of EMILE Durkheim in our next lecture. Thank you very much. Namaskar.